Today we're going to show you how to change the door bellows on your front load washer. And it's a really easy job. All we're going to need is a Phillips screwdriver, a small flat blade screwdriver, and maybe a 10mm socket and ratchet. Let me show you how we do it. Now before we begin this repair, the first thing we'll need to do is to disconnect the power to the washer, and you may need to pull it ahead far enough that we can access the two screws that hold the top panel in place. Now they're a Phillips head screw and also a 10mm hex head on them as well, so if the screwdriver doesn't remove them, you can use your ratchet and 10mm socket. So remove the two screws and set them aside, and then we're just going to pull that top back a little bit to disengage it from the front. There's a couple of little slots on that front panel that engage two shoulder screws right up close to the console. We'll set the top aside. Now next we're going to remove the soap drawer, so pull it out as far as it will go and then depress the little latch and remove it all the way and set that aside. Next we'll remove the screws that secure the console to the cabinet, and there will be 3 or 4 across the top plus one that was in behind the soap drawer, and these are all Phillips head screws. And we'll just lift up on the back of that control panel, tilt it forward enough that we can release it from the top of the front panel. Now if there's enough wire harness to set that console up on top of the washer, it'll be safe there. Now next we're going to open the door, and we're going to release the door bellows from the front panel before we remove the front panel. So using a flat blade screwdriver, we'll go down to the 6 o'clock position and just peel that door boot back enough, and you'll see that there is a spring there and then a metal band that goes all the way around it. So we'll go into one of the looped ends of that spring with our flat blade screwdriver. And we're just going to pry that out enough so we can get hold of that wire band and pull it off and remove it. We'll set that aside. We can then just peel that boot away from the front panel. Detach it completely. Now there are two methods that we can use to remove this front panel and door lock assembly. We can either detach the door lock assembly from the front panel first and then just let it hang in place, or we can tilt the front panel out with the lock attached to it and disengage the wires. The method for removing it will be to take the two screws off that are around the latch receptor, and then one more up by the door switch. We'll set those aside, and we can close that door, and we're going to remove the screws across the top of the front panel. We'll set those aside. Now there's a little clip at the very top of that front panel that we can depress and tilt the front panel forward, and we also want to support that door at the same time. Now you may need to use your flat blade screwdriver to depress that tab, and just tilt it forward, and then we'll disengage it from the 3 clips at the bottom, and again make sure that we hold the door closed, and then we can set that safely aside. Now with the front panel removed, we can just take that door latch assembly and set that out of the way. Now there is a band that goes around the back of that bellows that holds it to the outer tub, and it's a screw type clamp at the top. So next we'll loosen that screw enough that we can peel that band clamp off of there, and then we can remove the bellows from the outer tub. So we're going to loosen that screw on that clamp enough that we can pull the clamp right off of the boot, and just take your flat blade screwdriver and go in there and separate the top of that clamp to spread it open enough, and then you should be able to lift it out of the groove all the way around that bellows, and we'll set that clamp aside, and then just peel that boot away from the outer tub and we can discard it. Now before we install the new one, we should go around that opening and just take a damp rag and clean all that edge so that we get a nice tight fit with the new bellows. Now when installing the new bellows, we need to first of all line up the 3 drain hole openings in the bottom with the 3 openings in the tub cover. And you'll also note that there is a little V groove on the outside of that bellows, and that is what our clamp wire sits in. Now there is a projection of rubber on that bellows beyond that that will tuck in between the inner basket and the outer tub. So we'll need to feed that in as we work the boot around, and it may not stay in place completely as you're installing it, so you may have to redo some of it. But we'll start by lining up that bottom. We'll tuck that lip in between the tubs and just work your way around. At the same time, we're going to take that V-groove edge and fold it out over that groove on the outer tub. Now, the trickier area will be along this side where the counterweight is, and on the left side as well, so there's not much room to get your hand in between the bellows and that counterweight. But avoid using any sharp tools such as a screwdriver to push that into place, or you may damage the new bellows. Now once it's set in flush all the way around, we'll just check that bottom again to make sure that it's centered properly. In the top, we need to make sure that that portion is around the cup on that outer tub cover. Now we can reinstall the clamp. We'll try to keep the screw portion of that right at the 12 o'clock position. So just work it around the complete circumference of that bellows, making sure that it's sitting into the groove. And again, just double check, make sure it's sitting flush. And then we can tighten it with our Phillips screwdriver and do a last check. Make sure there's nothing binding on the tub. Just give that inner basket a turn, make sure it's not scraping on that new bellows. And then we can put the front panel on. Now when reinstalling that front panel, we want to locate those slotted openings on the bottom of the front panel with the tabs that project from the base of the washer. We'll set that in and then tilt the panel forward. And before we do that, we're going to take the door lock mechanism. We're just going to set it up in this area so that we can access it from the front. So holding the door closed while we position that front panel, we'll tilt it up into position, making sure that we don't bind any of the wires to that door lock assembly. And then we're going to snap the rectangular opening in the top of that front panel over that locking tab, and that will hold it in position until we can get some screws on. So we'll install the screws across the front and make sure all 6 of these screws are tightened securely. We'll then open that door up. And we'll have the 3 screws that we need for the door lock assembly handy. And then we're going to reach in past that bellows, take that door lock and set it into position, making sure that the switch portion protrudes without any restriction. Replace the 3 screws. And when we tighten these screws, make sure that the push button on that door switch does not bind on the opening around the front panel. We can next take that bellows and pull it out through the opening. And like the side that attached to the outer tub, there is a V groove around the face of it that will set down into a channel. We'll start by feeding that all the way around. Now, once we have it completely set into place, just check all the way around the edge, make sure that it's flush. Then we'll take that band clamp with the spring on the bottom. We'll position that spring at the 6 o'clock position. And then we're just going to wrap as much of it around as possible, making sure that it fits tightly into that groove. Now with our flat blade screwdriver, we're just going to hold one end of that clamp wire and pull against the spring while we take our flat blade and just gently tuck that in the rest of the way. Pull against the tension of the spring until it drops into position. And do a check all the way around, make sure that we didn't disrupt it. Now we can put the console back in place. Now across the bottom of that console, there are 6 tabs that will line up with 6 rectangular holes on the top of the front panel. So we're going to position the console into those holes first. You can actually get a pretty good view from the back side so that we know we have them lined up properly. Just rotate it into position. Then we'll replace the screws that you removed that secure that console to the frame member across the top, and the one remaining one through the front by the soap drawer, and tighten those all securely, and then we can put the main top back on. So again, as we put that main top on, make sure that we engage these 2 tabs under the 2 shoulder screws to secure it in place. So just set that down about an inch back from the console, and then slide it forward and make sure it engaged on both sides. Replace the 2 10mm hex head screws on the back using either your ratchet or a Phillips screwdriver. You can now replace the detergent drawer. Just line up the 2 channels with the openings at the top on either side. Make sure it slides in and out properly. Now we're ready to reconnect the power, and our repair is complete.